So Werner Herzog's lifetime of artistic output is so voluminous that the difficulty of deeply understanding it and contextualizing it here for you tonight is only matched by the near impossibility that one man has indeed created it all. So how can I possibly summarize that for you tonight? Well, thankfully, Werner told me this weekend that he's not here to talk about his films. So thankfully, he let me off the hook in that sense. Thanks, Werner. But on the other hand, I do have the Cinema Savant Award here to give out, so now I can't talk about movies. So thanks, Werner, for that. But of course, Refocus is a festival of adaptation. So why shouldn't I be challenged to refine my own understanding of his art under these new circumstances? Over the last 24 hours, over modelos and pork tenderloins, I've listened as Werner has had conversations with people in our community about the nuances of translating ancient Greek, about the exhilarating speed of cattle calling, about the unsettling feeling of language becoming dormant inside of us when we have no one to speak it with. By his own account, right there in the book that you all have under your seats, he is obsessed with the limits of language. These limits are there to hold us back, but these limits are also there to challenge us. Werner Herzog has spent a lifetime confronting these limits, the limits of his life circumstances, the limits of human understanding, the limits of artistic definitions, and the limits of cinema. Because even within his films, Werner has challenged us to have a different relationship with the movies. He's been a storyteller first, a poet, a writer, even on screen. His imagery is deeply symbolic, and yet his words are often more memorable than the images. In fact, so much so that the sound of his singular voice can now transport us, refocus our lens on the world from his unique vantage point. So perhaps it's not unusual or coincidental that we are here tonight handing out an award to one of the most influential filmmakers of the last half century in a UNESCO City of Literature, and we're going to talk about words. So for a lifetime of art that has pushed past the limits of language, our 2023 Cinema Savant awardee, Werner Herzog.
Should we take us 40 here? Well, thank you very much for this honor. I should fleetingly touch it only tonight because this is for cinema, but I'm actually more simple for literature, for poetry, and I do have a partner in crime, Andre. Where is he? Is he hiding?
He is, and I'm going to bring him out to the stage now. So please join me in welcoming our conversation partner for this evening, Romanian-born poet, novelist, screenwriter, commentator for National Public Radio, winner of the Albin Prize for Poetry, as well as the Peabody Award for his film, Rhodes Scholar. His papers are housed here at the University of Ireland Special Collections, and his latest book of poetry is Too Late for Nightmares, Andre Kudryska.
Honor to share the stage with one of the great film artists of the second half of the 20th century, decade of the 21st, because this stage is in Iowa City, a famous nursery for writers. The film artist is Werner Herzog, a man known for keeping it fresh by going against convention. We are going to defy expectations and speak less of film and more about writing and literature. Namely Werner Herzog's writing and body of literature. So we are here to celebrate the publication of his memoir, Every Man for Himself and God Against All. The title that he had originally wanted to call his masterwork Aguirre and the Wrath of God.
It was the Enigma of Caspar.
Oh, no, sorry, the Enigma of Caspar.
It doesn't matter if the title didn't work, nobody got it right. The reviewers wrote God all alone, and men fighting with each other, and one man for himself, and God doesn't know what to do, and so it's completely crazy. But I give it a second chance.
Well, we so fiercely prevented from doing that. You had to turn to literature. And at the age of 80, name the story of your life, Every Man for Himself and God Against All. So there are many ways to look at this, but the obvious one is to never go against Werner Herzog's instinct in cinematic matters, because he'll take his revenge in another medium. In this case, a suspenseful account of an extraordinary life that parallels and often exceeds the adventures and perils of the characters in the movies. One hears filmmakers talking about literature, whether scripts are fiction, as the lower supports of the totem pole that holds film, something to be used or changed or forgotten. But Werner, you turn this notion on its head, because I'm sure that films and writing will outlive the experience, maybe even kill dramas. And I know that Candide's experience can be easily glossed over. Anyway, you told me last night that your writing will outlive your film. How can this be?
Well, I have always had the feeling, well, I'm here to make something clear. I'm a writer who incidentally also makes films. I've been a poet since I'm very young, from my adolescence on, and from first publications on, and it was back in the 70s. Most of you probably were not even born yet. At that time, I did traveling. I traveled on foot from Munich to Paris at the beginning of winter, because my mentor, an old Jewish woman, great scholar of cinema and a great writer on literature also, Lotte Eisner, was dying, and I would not allow her. I just came walking on foot. She actually didn't know that I came on foot, but I knew 1,000 kilometers on foot against a snowstorm from the west every day, she would be out of hospital. And she was out of hospital. So it was like a pilgrimage, and I always had the feeling, yes, here writing the diaries that I wrote, and my the kind of language that formed in me had something of a very, very direct substance and direct essence that would probably outlive films that I make, because when you make a film, many things are in between: finances, organization, technology, camera work, editing, writing, directing, crazy actors, you just name it. You have to domesticate it all. When you are writing, and that's the beauty of what we are doing, you can be anywhere and just scribble something down on a piece of paper. I always had the feeling, and I'm still convinced after my last books, that they will live longer than my films. And it shouldn't puzzle you, because I have a very simple way to explain it. My films are my voyage, and writing is home. So that's how I feel it. And when we look at the memoirs, it's not so much the events. Yes, there were events, true, but it's very much about origins of ideas or language itself, language that has been informed by the worldview and by this very unusual, in a way, unusual life. So I do write like, I do not see anyone around who writes like me. And it is because my world that has formed inside of me has been a different world.
You also said that your scripts are in fact prose poems, and did you publish any of them as poems, or is that?
Yeah, well, I have published screenplays because I always try to develop screenplays as a form, a genre of literature. Today nobody sees screenplays, and I do write things. For example, early screenplays were written like a short story, like something like a short story by Hemingway. Yes, key dialogues would be there, but otherwise it's descriptive and not the dialogues formatted in a more narrow column. I had no idea how a screenplay looked like. So I developed my own format. I do write things like Cobra Verde. I remember the first 2 sentences or 3 sentences are about the heat, description of heat in Brazil, in the Sertão, in the northeast. The dogs are lying in the shadow and barely breathe. And then the next sentence is about metallic insects. It's very, very strange. Demented by fury, metallic insects sting glowing hot stones. End of sentence. Gives a feeling of heat, and a screenplay normally doesn't do that. And
well, some critics, those barnacles of art, have often labeled you as an practitioner of German romanticism. And well, I must admit that when I think of that, I think of a character like the painting of Caspar David's Friedrich, a man on a mountain peak looking with his back to the viewer, looking out in the vast.
The wandering, looking with a back to us over the field of mist and very beautiful painting, but I'm not really very familiar with Romanticism. I have much deeper connection, for example, to Baroque poetry. Andreas Gryphius, a German, very intense Baroque poet who was formed by the catastrophes of the 30 Years' War, or Hölderlin, the greatest of our poets in German language, Kleist, Büchner, who are not romantic sometimes. They are connected with him, but I don't see it that way. And in France, for example, whenever people try to categorize my writing or my films, the French, they know about Germany, Romanticism, it must be in the tradition of Romanticism. Or the other thing they know about Bertolt Brecht, he must be in the tradition of Bertolt Brecht. I don't like Bertolt Brecht. So only some of his poems I truly like. But so it's really not what I'm into, and I can give you the proof for it. For example, but I have many moments in my writings where it's quite obvious. For example, Conquest of the Useless and description of the jungle. Towards the end, I was back where I moved the ship over the mountain, and I ran into 2 of the men at a native indigenous village, Shivakureni, who at the time had asked me or had somehow offered to kill Klaus Kinski for me. which I couldn't accept. I still needed him. It was midday and very still. I looked around because everything was so motionless. I recognized the jungle as something familiar, something I had inside me, and I knew that I loved it, yet against my better judgment. Then words came back to me that had been circling, swirling inside of me through all these years. Hearten, heifer, hoarfrost, denizens of the crag, will-o'-the-wisp, hogwash, uncouth, flotsam, fiend. Only now did it seem as though I could escape from the vortex of words. Sometimes it's very strange how words cannot be deleted. Every day they are swirling inside of me. It happens sometimes to us when a melody takes hold of us and we can't get it out of our minds. No matter what we do, we drive in a car, we go to sleep, we go to a restaurant, and still this melody is there and we can't get. And the moment I was there, all of a sudden this spell, the vortex was broken. Something struck me, a change that actually was no change at all. I had simply not noticed it when I was working there. There had been an odd tension hovering over the huts, a brooding hostility. The native families hardly had any contact with each other, as if a feud reigned among them. But I had always overlooked that somehow, or denied it. Only the children had played together. Now, as I made my way past the huts and asked for directions, it was hardly possible to get one family to acknowledge another. The seething hatred was undeniable, as if something like a climate of vengeance prevailed, from hut to hut, from family to family, from clan to clan. I looked around, and there was the jungle, manifesting the same seething hatred, wrathful and steaming, while the river flowed by in majestic indifference and scornful condescension, ignoring everything, the plight of man, the burden of dreams, and the torments of time. So now, please call the Romanian.
As you said, the effect as the entire focus on.
Well, yes, I did. People sometimes do not believe it, but I actually hypnotized a cast because, well, the story was of a village community in Lower Bavaria at the end of the 18th century, where they have lost the secret of making ruby glass. And they, in a collective trance, walk into a foreseen catastrophe. There is actually a cowherd with prophetic gift who prophesies and describes what is going to happen. And they walk into this kind of foreseen and described disaster. And I thought, how would I stylize this kind of somnambulistic, trance-like behavior? And I thought, why shouldn't they play under hypnosis, real hypnosis? And I did sessions for casting and selected a cast. And I actually engaged the services of a professional hypnotist. And it was terrible. He was this kind of new age creep who claimed that he could attract a cosmic aura onto him because he had the powers to attract them and then radiate it on to the subjects and put them in hypnosis, and then after 2 sessions I couldn't take him anymore. I had to dismiss him. So now I was there with 25 people who had to be hypnotized, so I had to do it myself.
By reading poetry? By reading poetry?
No, yes, it's an interesting question because sometimes under hypnosis people have a deeper sense of memory. They memorize dialogues very easily. They have great fantasy for poetry. For example, I had people under hypnosis and I said to individuals, open your eyes slowly, you will not wake up from your wonderful state, and you see a gigantic cliff, but it is a cliff not made of rock. It is a cliff, a gigantic cliff, one single pure emerald. And 1,000 years ago, a holy monk spent all his life with a chisel and hammer to inscribe a poem into this cliff, into this emerald. Can you see it? Read it to me. And some of them had very beautiful visions in poetry. One said, why can't we drink the moon? Why is there no vessel to hold it? It was really, really beautiful. And the sense of poetry sometimes, not all the time, sometimes can be emphasized and can be invigorated. And in a way, for my own kind of speech, when I have my stage speech, like in commentaries for documentaries, I have a form of speech, of course with my accent, I cannot help it, but I have it, and so I do not try to hide my accent away, but there's some sort of a hypnotic way to speak the text. But it's not only the way how I speak it, it's the way, it's more what I'm saying. People always think it's a voice. No, it's more the content. In a film about volcanoes not long ago, I have at the end, I speak about the magma, the glowing interior of the earth that wants to burst forward and devour everything in flames. And it is monumentally indifferent to scurrying cockroaches, retarded reptiles, and vapid humans alike. So you do not hear such a thing on National Geographic. I articulate it and I do it, and I'm a poet, and I couldn't care less what HBO tells me. I have to change this. I have to change this text. I say, no, you better change your entire network, or I'm going to buy it, and I will fire you all.
Well, an accent helps, not just what it is that you are telling people, but what you think they hear. And so you have an accent, I guess, people do not get rid of it.
No, I cannot be slavish enough to polish everything up. It wouldn't be me anymore. I'm too Bavarian for that, too obstinate, too stout in my culture.
You have a fabulous voice. In fact, you could open franchises.
Yes, I contemplated once because I was approached. Could I speak for one of these GPS systems? Yes, I would do it, but I would do it very softly, but really in a very intimidating form. In 1,000 feet, turn to the left. Turn to the left now. You better turn now. So that you should be scared. But I didn't do it, although there was money in it.
And you started, they got to the river, you didn't say jump.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I would like to say too that you, in addition to making the scripts and new literary genre, your interviews are also a new literary genre, because you must have heard thousands of times the same questions, and you never, instead of reciting yourself, you always make it fresh. And that's an extraordinary thing. I was wondering how you managed that, actually. One of my favorite book-length interviews with you was the 2002 Werner Herzog by Paul Cronin.
Yeah, conversations.
Yeah, conversations. You tell some of the same stories, but somehow you managed to make them sound fresh.
You see, I don't want to become a parrot of myself, which is sometimes not easy because questions are similar, and I don't have a different answer, but of course, I try to imagine what I really have to say, and each time, of course, it comes in a slightly different shape, and that's the very nature of memoirs, for example. That your memory is not completely reliable always. We know that human brain has endowed us with memory that is very, very kind to us, that we can forget things, that we can. I don't like psychoanalysis because it reawakens traumata that we had early in our lives. Sometimes it's very, very good that we can forget, and sometimes it's not good to illuminate every last dark corner in our souls. So, and it's something that is not completely reliable. And in the memoirs, I say sometimes, yes, here I'm not sure. The opponents that await me at their home, who have threatened to kill me if I enter. It was a catastrophic thing with a catastrophic love story, an early love story. And I described the brothers of my girlfriend, who were all ice hockey players, strong Bavarian guys, 4 of them. But I immediately said, maybe my memory exaggerates now, maybe it was only 3. So I try to point out that I'm not completely sure. And of course, in many cases, I have spoken to people who were present, in particular my brothers, early things in our lives, poverty, for example, incidents with my mother. My brother, for example, you showed me one passage. My brother only remembers it halfway, but it's really embedded in my soul. Can I?
Yeah, I was wondering if you would. It's.
Can I have your?
Yeah, if you read it once a week and go on together. Okay.
You have to imagine the situation. I was only 2 weeks old when we were bombed out in Munich. And my mother fled to the most remote corner in the mountains where it was apparently safe. And we grew up in real poverty. We had no running water. We had to go to the well with a bucket, and we had no toilet. We had no telephone. I made my first telephone call at the age of 19. So, 17, sorry. I was younger than that. 17, my first phone call. And I remember that it was a wonderful childhood. And there was danger. Of course, I knew very early on. And it's my first memory, we as refugees there. And towards the end of the war, it must have been only weeks away from the end of the war, my mother wakes us up, my older brother, and we were completely stunned, and she wraps us into blankets, carries us up on the slope next to the house, and at the end of the valley you could see the sky glowing, pulsing slowly in orange and red. And she said, you have to see this. The city of Rosenheim is burning. But the city of Rosenheim is 40 miles away. So you do not see flames, you see this slow pulsing sky. And I knew there was something like war out there. There was danger, there was catastrophes out there. And of course there was also hunger. We were very hungry when we were children. And I described one scene about my mother. Once a week there was a longish loaf of bread from the village baker, purchased with our ration coupons. With a point of a knife, our mother scratched a mark in it for each day, Monday to Sunday, allowing about a slice of bread for each of us. When hunger got to be very bad, we were each given a piece from the next day's ration, because my mother hoped something might turn up in the meantime. But generally, the bread was finished by Friday, and Saturdays and Sundays were particularly bad. My deepest memory of my mother, burned into my brain, is a moment when my brother and I were clutching at her skirts, whimpering with hunger. With a sudden jolt, she freed herself, spun round, and she had a face full of an anger and despair that I have never seen before or since. She said perfectly calmly, "Listen, boys, if I could cut it out of my ribs, I would cut it out of my ribs, but I can't, all right." At that moment, we learned not to wail. The so-called culture of complaint disgusts me. One thing, it sounds like a terrible childhood. It actually was the most wonderful, rounded up childhood, full of fantasy, full of mysteries, full of forests with fairies in it, and full of mythical figures that we adored as village boys. And the same thing you can hear from peers of mine who grew up in the ruins in the destroyed cities, like in Munich, Berlin, Cologne. I think 720 cities in Germany were almost completely destroyed. There were only ruins. And we have documentary film evidence of that. And we would immediately think, oh my God, and commiserate the children. They all are deliriously ecstatic about this time. It's very strange, but it is a fact.
So much for the culture of complaint.
So, yes.
This might come up in the Q&A, but you know, one of my favorite documentaries of yours is Little Dieter Needs to Fly.
Yeah.
And I think that what that character goes through it has in the back of it hunger and trials in the childhood to be able to survive.
Yeah. And even worse in our situation, he had a younger brother, and his mother would go out. He grew up in a remote place in the Black Forest. His mother would go to the next small town, and in the ruins they would rip the wallpaper off the destroyed walls, and the mother would cook. She would boil the wallpaper because there were nutrients in the glue. That's how they survived. So, but absolutely no complaint. And of course, the world out there was full of awe, full of danger, full of things that made me curious. And I set out into the world. And much of the voyage were my films. Much of what was going on inside is my poetry and my prose.
Well, I didn't have such a terrible childhood, but similar because we had no toys. And I grew up under the
But we created them.
and we made them.
Yes.
So everything could become.
We created, for example, an arrow, a flat arrow carved from a beechwood log, and we whipped it away with a whip, and it sailed on it. It had a slight hump on its back. So it was almost like the wing of an aeroplane. You couldn't aim it. If you shot it away, it would land somewhere, but it would fly further than any arrow would fly. We invented it, and we had no idea about aerodynamics. It was just good like that. And I had to invent cinema. I never learned anything. I had to learn how to write. I had to learn, it's all self-taught. For example, I staged operas, I have been acting in films, never learned it, never competed for a role in an audition.
Yeah. What is the difference though, between a dream and an obsession?
Of what?
A dream and an obsession.
Well, it's a difficult question. Don't look at me too hard, because people sometimes believe that I'm obsessive. No, I'm not. Or that I take no for an answer. Whenever it's necessary, I take no for an answer. I did 9 films on death row with women and men on death row waiting for their execution, and I had conversations with them. And in one case, I had the team ready to go to Huntsville in Texas, where they have the death house. And I got a call from the attorney of the man who was going to die 8 days later. And the attorney said to me, Mr. Herzog, my client, I cannot influence his decision. He decided to speak to your camera, but my client has a tendency to say stupid things in public. It has been very much to his detriment. And we have a last appeal for clemency out there. Could you reconsider? I said to the attorney, I'm not reconsidering, I'm canceling right here and now. I'm not doing it. So I take even a hint of a no as an answer. Sometimes I do the doable, and I preach to young people, do the doable. And sometimes it's hard to do the doable. Like you do not move easily a ship over a mountain. It's a 320-ton monster in the jungle with the technology of Neolithic times. It's not an easy task, but I knew it was doable. And people, my crew members, tried to persuade me against my own insanity. And now kicks in the dream. I said, no, there's a very clear dream, a clear vision. The vision itself has a certain power that carries us, not my iron will. I've never been a person of obsession and iron will and all this kind of stupid things. I don't like that. I always relied on the force, on the power of vision, the power of the dream. And I said it here in these short excerpts. These dreams or these visions are inside of many of us, but I can articulate them. And it's a similar thing like a big metaphor, like the white whale, the hunt for the white whale, Melville's Moby Dick. It's a similar thing, a similar great, deep metaphor in us. And Melville was the one who articulated it. So I'm very glad that we had him and that he wrote Moby Dick.
Well, let's go back to language for a moment and talk about translation, because your memoir is translated by a very good translator from the German, Michael Hoffman, who's very
a poet himself.
Well known in the poets. And you had a discussion about the word it.
Yeah.
And it went on, and it's a significant
Yes. It's interesting. I have to describe the moment, possibilities to end the film Akere. And very late after I had done the film, an apocryphal sort of writing came to me about the end of Akere. He kills his own 15-year-old daughter, so she doesn't see, she doesn't become witness of his downfall and of his shame. And he kills the daughter and then asks his last henchman to shoot him with a musket. So the henchman loads the musket and shoots him in the chest. And Akere says, "This was nothing," and orders him to reload. So the man reloads, shoots him right through the heart. And then Akere says, "This will do it." And I immediately said to the translator, "Leave the it out." He should say, "The first shot, this was nothing. The second shot that goes through his heart, this will do," and he collapses dead. Leave the it out. So there was a serious discussion about the it. And also very strange sometimes, translations try to improve. There's a wonderful example of Walking in Ice, mid-70s. I hesitated 6 years until I actually wrote it in clear script and wrote this book. Same thing with Conquest of the Useless. 26 years later, only I could touch it and look into it and transcribe it. It was so painful, so deep. And when I traveled on foot, it's almost 1,000 kilometers. In the last 85 kilometers, I walked. I had enough of walking, and I walked until I was there. 85 kilometers, a whole day, against slush and rain and snow and strong wind. And I walked the entire night, and I walked the next day, and I arrived at Lotte Eisner. And in a way, language started, and images and things started to disintegrate. It's very, very odd. It was not, I was not right with my language anymore. And I read the end of this Saturday, 14th December. As afterthought, just this, I went to Madame Eisner, Lotte Eisner. She was still tired and marked by her illness. Someone must have told her on the phone that I had come on foot. I didn't want to mention it. I was embarrassed and placed my smarting legs up on the second armchair, which he had pushed over to me. In the embarrassment, a thought passed through my head, and since the situation was strange anyway, I told it to her. Together, I said, we shall boil fire and stop fish. Then she looked at me and smiled very delicately, and since she knew that I was alone on foot and therefore unprotected, she understood me. For one splendid, fleeting moment, something mellow flowed through my deadly tired body. I said to her, "Open the window. From these last days onward, I can fly." What I would like to point out is my language in German was not correct anymore. And I said to her, we shall boil fire. You boil your laundry or you boil water, but you don't boil fire. You start a fire and you do not stop fish. I said, Fische anhalten. We will stop fish, you stop the traffic, but you do not stop fish. And now all of a sudden I saw 2 weeks ago the Italian translation of it, where the translator tried to correct it and corrected it back into together we will start a fire and we'll catch fish. So tried to correct the incorrect German. So it happens. So in the next edition it will be different.
Yeah, I wonder what the AI would
No, it will not be able to do these nuances.
Of
No.
course not.
AI will never write a book like I do.
Of course not. Can you tell people what your other books are, so just so that we have forgotten?
The Twilight World, a novel.
And the Twilight World,
It's the story of the last Japanese soldier, Hiro Onoda, who surrendered 29 years after the end of the Second World War, still believing that the war was on. And he tried to read the signs, what was going on. And for example, he was all alone. At first, he had some comrades, and one of them defected and ran over to the Philippine army. The second one was shot dead in an ambush 26 years later, and the last one was also shot in an ambush around the same time. And Onoda survived 111 ambushes and firing at him. And he tried to read the signs, what was going on. Yes, when you are fired at, and he had to hold the island for the return of the Imperial Army that had fled. With the order, hold the island, we'll use it as a launching pad for our new attack on Manila Bay. And he saw, for example, squadrons of warplanes crossing overhead on this Philippine island towards, and it was already the next American war. It was the Korean War. Then years later he sees B-52 bombers, warships, cruisers, everything all moving west overhead for 8-9 years. That was already America's next war in Vietnam. And he was convinced, reading leaflets that came raining down from a small aircraft. And he reads in Japanese that Japan had surrendered in August 1945, but it was 25 years later. So, and he sees in the text there are some misspellings of Japanese characters. For him, it was proof that the enemy, the CIA, had concocted this leaflet in order to lure him into a trap and arrest him or kill him. So it's a very, very interesting way to see how a man tries to read the signs. In the big picture, he didn't have the context, and because of that, he fought a tragically fictitious. It was a fictitious war, a war that didn't exist anymore. And we had an instant rapport. Strangely enough, I don't know, sometimes it happens that within 5 minutes flat, you have a very deep rapport with someone, and we had a wonderful time together and encounters, and I will read somehow how we would speak about the jungle, because that's what I lived through in the jungle. Felt like fever dreams. For him, it was also something like, was it a dream? Was it somnambulistic? What was it? And the book begins on Lubang Island, 1940. It's beautifully translated by Michael Hoffman. The night coils in fever dreams. No sooner awake than with an awful shudder, the landscape reveals itself as a durable daytime version of the same nightmare, crackling and flickering like loosely connected neon tubes. From daybreak, the jungle has twitched in the ritual torches of electricity. Rain. The storm is so distant that its thunder is not yet audible. A dream? Is it a dream? A white path on either side, dense underbrush, rotting mulch on the ground, the leaves dripping. The jungle remains stiff, patient, humble, until the office of the reign has been celebrated. So that's how we somehow encountered the jungle, or that's how the jungle had become part of us, part of our soul. It's not a landscape anymore, it's an inner landscape. And so I had a very, very clear rapport with him.
And Conquest of the Useless.
Yeah.
Is the novel.
Well, it is taken from diaries, and the strange thing is, I wrote diaries, or one volume about this size only, but I would write in miniature, write a script, like 5 printed pages on one. And for deciphering it and making a transcript, I needed glasses, and then flipped on some magnifying glasses like dentists are using, or like jewelers are using. Only that way I could transcribe it. And I couldn't face it in the beginning, and then finally my wife said to me, you know, sometime you will not be around anymore, you will die, and the diary is still around, and some idiot is going to try himself or herself on it. It's going to be a disaster, we better do it now. I actually followed her advice, and I did it. And I do not regret 1 second. And same thing here, I just finished this book, and I was looking out the window, and she said, "Are you thinking about something?" I said, "No, I'm not thinking." "What are you looking at?" I said, "I'm not seeing anything, I'm just standing." And she said, "Why don't you continue writing?" I sat down and immediately wrote the memoirs. Yes, it sounds funny. It sounds funny, but it's very. I carried my life with me now for 80 years, so it's in me. So it was all articulate already, and voices come back to me, and images come back to me, and much of it is not really, how shall I say, biography or so, or it's origins of ideas, or all of a sudden the text is interspersed with 5 ballads of the little soldier. And there, because I was with child soldiers in Honduras, Nicaragua, and with an elite unit, and most of these soldiers were between 8, 9, 10, the oldest of the child soldiers, 11. And I write about them. It's not biography, it's literature. It's like somebody would write a very laconic, harsh, what shall I say, short story. I'd like to read to you, although you have the book, Ballad of the Little Soldier number 5, because it's so vividly in me that it was very easy to recapitulate it. It was actually in Honduras at the coast, and they had a training camp nearby, and of course all of them were heavily armed, all of them were sent as vanguard into combat, because children have been the most valiant, the bravest of the brave. Ballad of the Little Soldier 5. Gently, undistracted, he pushed the cigarette this way and that with the toe of his boot. The only way it could fall between the cracks into the sea washing around under the veranda of the bar was if he aligned it exactly. I noted that the soldier had just lit it and taken only 2 drags from it. Then he picked it up and carefully put it out on the table. Cuéntame algo, I said to him. Tell me something. No, nothing to say, he answered. He had his M16 leaning against the table next to him. He was too young to be a soldier. He looked very indigenous. His name was Palladino Mendoza. He said, a name exists forever, even if you are dead. We looked along the pier in the lagoon beyond, and where a ferry had run aground. The propeller was stirring up sand. The only visible cargo on the flat deck was a small car whose driver was alternately accelerating and braking. There wasn't much more than 2 yards of space. This happened a few times, and the ferry wobbled a little but remained stuck. Overhead was a wheel of vultures, black and ominous. There are too many stars at night too. This here is a war of children. Sleepiness settles over everything. There's the word bliss, the word yoke. Turn up one's toes. 91. Gunfire alarmed me. The soldier Palladino Mendoza was gone. I didn't notice him leave. I next saw him on the pier amid more gunshots, closely spaced. I thought the firing was at the freighter at the end of the pier because a few men were crowding together looking for cover. Following where they were looking, I saw a boy hurriedly pushing aside his moped. Then, all alone on the pier now, I saw the soldier Palladino with his rifle pressed against his hip and emptying his magazine into the air. Everyone was looking at him. He wanted their attention. Then he calmly took his rifle in both hands and shot himself in the mouth. Since he had the muzzle in his mouth, the shot this time sounded like no shot I had ever heard. As though sitting down, he lowered himself and simultaneously collapsed backward. Another little soldier came crying toward me on the pier. I picked up one of the cartridges off the boards, still hot, knowing it couldn't give me any information. The police chief came running up with drawn pistol and waved it around uselessly for a while. Now he too is standing there in the slowly drying blood, playing pocket billiards. His canine teeth are framed in silver. I saw that Palladino Mendoza had the ring pull of a Coke can on his finger. His brains were a yellow foaming mess, streaked with bright blood. The palms of his hands were turned upward. His eyes too were gazing upward, empty into emptiness. He lay there quite tidily, his face collected, the storm inside him calmed. It started raining quietly, and his hands, no longer sentient, caught some of the drops. Right by Palladino's feet were a few coarse, torn paper cement sacks. They were left there because they had absorbed moisture and had long since caked into gray, caked chunks. A pig pretended to snuffle the concrete, but its eyes were on the corpse. It had tried to lick the pasty brains, and someone had shooed it away with a kick. That's ballot number 5.
Well, this is quite extraordinary. Better than the movie, at the movies.
No, it shouldn't be made in a movie at all. There are things that are literature. Never touch it. Never, ever, ever, ever touch it for making it into a film. You just don't.
line of thought here. You are also quite fond of the Midwest.
No, I wouldn't say Midwest. I would call it differently. My definition is different. The heartland. The heartland of America. And that, it actually includes Pittsburgh, for example. Yes, no, because I was homeless. I had given up a scholarship after a few days. And I was homeless walking on a country road in the rain, and the car stopped, and the family picked me up, a mother and 7 children, between 17 and 27. And I became part of the family within 2 minutes flat. Hospitality and an openness and curiosity by them that is unparalleled. I've seen the very, very, very best of America. And when it comes to elections, my friends say, yeah, and they are from Boston or from Seattle or from San Francisco or from New York, and they speak in the elections, yeah, the flyovers, and I stop them. How dare you to speak of the heartland as the flyovers? That is America at its best. Of course, underrepresented, underpaid, undereducated, disenfranchised in many cases, not with the level of education you have in Boston with all the universities. And you better look out for the heartland, because they are a slight majority, and you see it. They elect a president. They are the ones who elect a president. You have to look after them. You are living now in San Diego, and you have a friend, I know you have a friend who's still a school buddy who lives in Kansas. When have you spoken to him last? 5 years ago. I said, call him now. Speak to him.
Well, that's
make contact.
That is very generous of you.
No, generous. It's what I see. That's the reality. And I have worked in this. I've worked in Wisconsin. That's not far.
I'm thinking of
Stroshek, yeah.
You made in Wisconsin, and there's a quote here, a lovely quote actually from. Each year at springtime, scores of people on snowmobiles crashed into the melting ice on the lakes in Minnesota and drowned. Pressure is mounting on the new governor to pass a protective law. He, the former wrestler and bodyguard, has the only answer to this. You can't legislate stupidity.
That was Jesse Ventura. You may like him or not. He caught my eye when I was in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and it was elections a week away for governor. And there was a front runner that seemed to be unbeatable, and the second one in third place, far away, still 10 days away from election. I heard a radio show that Jesse Ventura ran. And I was driving in a car, and I stopped, and I kept listening. There was some voice all of a sudden, of course very far right, and so you may like him or not, it doesn't really matter. But somebody who speaks the language of the people, and very, very clear and forceful, a real natural politician. And he wins the election for governor. And for a while I liked it. Then when I saw some details, I had a more ambivalent feeling. But all of a sudden, these voices originate, and great writers come from the heartland, like Hemingway. I think isn't he from Kansas originally? And Bob Dylan, Minnesota. And the great writers of the Deep South, Flannery O'Connor and Faulkner, and you just name it. They come from there. They never come from San Diego.
We'll have to leave some people out. It can't happen. Great San Diego writer.
Okay. There may be some writer once in a while.
It seems that the film seems to be also a manifesto about fluted fiction. You also call it a rant against cinema verite.
Yeah, of course.
So it ends, by the way, the dancing chicken in the roadside show. Something from Route 66, I think, because I saw next to it was also a goose that, goose that played the piano.
Yes, a goose, a duck playing piano and a rabbit fire chief, but it's basically dancing chicken. And I filmed it in Cherokee, North Carolina. And it was one of these strange fever dreams that got stuck in me. And it was perpetually circling in me for years and years until it came back but transformed in a film. And the situation was I had to flee from America because after half a year I had to make a living in Pittsburgh. And I started to work on a project that someone in a TV station did for NASA, advanced unconventional propulsion systems. And I was fascinated, and there was a strange incident, I describe it in the memoirs. I don't go much into it, and there was security checks. And apparently they found out that I was not allowed to work. I was as an exchange student, I had no permit for working, and I was summoned to immigration, and I knew they would hand me my eviction or my expulsion orders and send me back straight to Germany, and I didn't want it, so I fled across the border to Mexico, and I had to make a living in Mexico. And it was wild time where I worked in charreadas, rodeos there, riding on young bulls. I can't even ride on a horse, and everybody could tell. So it was like a clown. But I earned enough money on Saturday for the coming week. And I was all the way down to Guatemala then, and had this kind of strange idea about helping along with the independence of a Guatemalan province, a Petén district, which had its own language, its own Cachiquele language, a Maya language, and then I was very, very ill, and I drove the car all the way back from the Guatemalan border to Pittsburgh. But en route, almost back home in Pittsburgh, I come into Cherokee, North Carolina, and there were highway repairs and detours and so, and I had high fever. I had been driving 48 hours already, sleeping in the car for 2-3 hours, and then moving on in fever. And I'm in Cherokee, North Carolina, and at 2 in the morning, and at 3:30 in the morning I'm back. I drive north, but I'm back in Cherokee, North Carolina, and then a third time. And I thought, this is only fever now, you better take care of yourself. And I went into a hamburger joint, which just opened at 6 in the morning, and had a burger. And the Native American woman who served, she saw that I was not right anymore. And she said, when you gave me the tip, the coins are dancing. And I said to her, everything is dancing. My car is dancing, my money is dancing. And she said, would you like to see the dancing chicken? I said, of course I do. And she took me across the street, and there are dancing chicken. But they would dance only for 5, 6, 7 seconds, and then would get a reward. And you had to toss in a coin, a quarter, to make them dance because the music started. And it's the end of the film, chicken that never end. They cannot be stopped dancing. I had them actually in special training. The owner of this amusement park came from Arkansas, and they were in winter quarters in Arkansas. And I asked the people who trained the chicken, trained them for extra long dances, barn shuffle dancing. And when I filmed, they danced very well. So it came back to me years later.
There's nothing like learning to dance in Arkansas. You know, speaking of, you're a marvelous storyteller, you know, and I won't let Halloween in Iowa pass without mentioning your film Nosferatu, which based on the 1922 masterpiece by Werner. And itself was based on Dracula, the great novel by Bram Stoker.
From your country.
Yes.
Vlad Dracula.
Yes, I also look at that in Czech countries.
Yeah.
So, how or why did you, the question is, decide to make a film based on a film instead of Bram Stoker's Dracula?
Yeah, well, Bram Stoker was the basis for Werner's film, and Lotte Eisner was the one who made me familiar with his work. And I always said, I don't want to make a remake, I reformulate the vampire, a vampire who is not like in Werner's film, like an insect, soulless and cold and metallic, a metallic soul. I want a vampire who is longing for participation in human life, love, attention, even death was denied to him. So it was an important step for me to connect with my own culture. But it's, of course, vampire stories are something deeply embedded in English culture, in German culture as well. And I have the similar attitude with writing, with literature. I'm kind of very deeply embedded in the flow of the great poets. And I mean, when I speak of them, I mean in particular Hölderlin, who went to the outer limits of my language, German. Of course, tragically, his language, his sentences disintegrate, his vocabulary, grammar starts to disintegrate completely, and his big poems at the end are fragments. And it's because he became insane. He traveled, he was somebody who would travel on foot a lot, and he traveled from a post as a private teacher for kids of school age of a wealthy winemaker in Bordeaux region, all the way, I think, to Stuttgart. And arrived insane, stark mad, and lived in a tower, taken care of by a carpenter, a local carpenter, in Tübingen for the next 35 years until he died. And so very tragically, how he goes to the outer limits of what language can do, and then comes apart. So the tragedy of Hölderlin is something which I deeply sense, and the poems itself are of such great depth and beauty, like nothing in German language. Of course, some others like prose, Georg Büchner. There's a short text, only 30 pages, a prose text, Lenz, about the Sturm und Drang poet Lenz, who also travels on foot, travels across the Black Forest in the Vosges Mountains, and arrives at a vicarage, insane. And the vicar describes, the parson there, the country priest, describes his progressive insanity. And it's Büchner's text is of such beauty and depth that I am completely speechless, and I'm glad that there can be in a tradition like that.
Well, yes, that's the romantic tradition
No, I do not. You see, we had the romantic poets and we had the classic Goethe and Schiller. But Kleist, Heinrich von Kleist, and I recommend highly, highly the short stories, the novellas of Kleist. Very, very intense and deep. Michael Kohlhaas or the Marquis of O or the Earthquake of Chile. It's wonderful, wonderful prose. And strangely enough, the greatest of all the German poets, these three, are neither classic nor romanticist. Somewhere in between, and visionaries who somehow proclaim the language of 100 years later.
You also said that Website, which you made the film from, is a quintessential German story, and it cannot be translated.
It can be translated, but very difficult. And the real difficulty is to translate Hölderlin, because his German is very odd, but very unique. There was somebody, I think Walter Benjamin once said Hölderlin is a language related to German. It's a beautiful way to express it.
It's also a beautiful way to end the evening. Thank you. And I could talk to you all night, obviously. And so could this audience listen to you all night.
What's that?
Could you elaborate on why and who Lottie Eisner was and why she was your mentor and you would have walked that far to visit her?
Well, at the end of walking the ice, I held a laudatio years later for her when she received an award in Germany, and I described her, but very briefly. Jewish born, highly intellectual. She was a trained archaeologist, and immediately went into literature and into film, and wrote about film, wrote about literature with a great insight and wisdom. And she was very anti-Nazi and wrote against them. And in Der Stürmer, one of the worst of all publications in Germany of the rising Nazis, there was an article: if we will take over this country and if heads are going to roll, her head will be one of the first. So on the very day Hitler took power, she fled Germany and fled to France, was hiding in France for 6 years until the end of the war, and worked at the Cinematheque, and she encouraged me. She was the one who said, listen, you don't be disencouraged, that nobody comes to see your film. They will stand the test of time. You are not going to quit. I do not allow that. And later I wouldn't allow her to die. Actually, at the end of her life, when she was about 88, she summoned me to Paris, and she said, it's urgent. I rushed to Paris. I think I took a night train. And she said to me, and she was very biblical, although completely casual between some sips of tea, she said to me, listen, you, Werner, you are very formal. Usted, in Spanish. She said, I'm blind, almost blind. The joy of my life to read, I cannot do that anymore. The other joy of my life to see movies, I cannot do anymore. And I'm almost paralyzed, I can only walk with crutches. But there's still a spell upon me, can you lift it? And very casually I said to her, Lotte, the spell is hereby lifted. And she died 8 days later. And it was right, I didn't have a problem then. And she had a perfect eye for writing and also for films. She told me a story about a school girlfriend, 17 years, and the girlfriend had a notebook, a sloppily bound notebook with a handwritten drama in it. And the friend said to her, I met a young man who claims to be a poet, but his breath is a little bit foul. So what do I do? Can you read it? You understand something about literature. Can you read it for me and tell me if he's a poet, a good one, I may have an affair with him. So Lotte reads his handwritten manuscript overnight, and it was Baal, the first theater play by Bertolt Brecht. And she said to her girlfriend, have an affair, this young man will be the greatest poet in Germany. So she had something very, very special. And for me, particularly important, but for all the young writers and filmmakers, she was somebody who had the capacity to give us legitimacy. She would proclaim in public, look out, there are some young people, and it is legitimate German culture again, after all the barbarism that we have gone through. So I owe her not everything, but I owe her my equilibrium and my confidence. So.
Mr. Herzog, welcome to Iowa. I was wondering if you have any characters.
Speak up, please.
I was wondering if you have any characters that like stand out to you in particular in fiction that have captured your imagination.
Sure, of course, the white whale, not a character, but a creature out there, Don Quixote. I just read a translation, by the way, by a romantic poet, Tieck, beautifully translated into German, so that there are characters out there that are indelibly marked upon my soul. And it happens all the time, and it's just a miracle of literature, of poetry, and that's what I do not want to miss until the end of my days. And I actually do not watch many films, but I read. It's not barely an evening where I do not fall asleep because the book has fallen on my chest, and then I turn off the light. And young filmmakers who come to me and they ask me, what should I do to become a real filmmaker? I have a simple answer. Read. All of you are not reading. None of you is reading. You will become filmmakers, but mediocre ones at best. You will only become a good filmmaker if you read. So that's my answer, and that's how literature is active inside of me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your work, and I have read The Twilight World and absolutely loved it and found it incredibly visual, and look forward to reading your new book. But I wanted to ask you...
Which new book?
Every man for himself. I gotta get some.
Because I've written yet another one.
Available at bookstores near you. But I was actually surprised when you included God in the title, knowing what you've seen and where you've been and how this earth has treated you, its indifference. I was surprised to find out that you believed in God. If that's true, can you describe your perception of what God is?
No, I can't. I dedicate an entire chapter to encounters with God, and I describe in my memoirs that I grew up a pagan, a heathen, unbaptized, without any religion, in a family of militant atheists. And at age 14, I decided I would become a Catholic against all odds, and against, yes, I knew that there were big problems about becoming a Catholic church history, church hierarchy, and some of the dogmas. And because of the dogmas, at age 14, I went into the discussions of the Council of Nicaea, 4th century, into the discussions of the Council of Ephesus, 5th century, and Council of Nicaea, of course. That was a big debate about the very nature and the substance of God, and the substance in the very essence. What is the essence of God? Since God creates time, he must be outside of time. Does Jesus Christ, his Son, have a different substance, a different essence, because his Son was born in time, within time? So I toiled with debates that occurred 1600 years before me. So, but let's not go into all this and describe it. I describe it in my memoirs to some degree.
Look forward to it, thank you.
But you can sense, although I'm not religious anymore, it dwindled away, you can sense a distant echo of something, a quest for something sublime, something transcendent. You even see it in titles like Agiri, the Wrath of God, or Every Man for Himself and God Against All. So it pops up once in a while. Thank you.
Hi. I have a question. I know you mentioned this earlier. You said your advice was read, but I wondered if you had any other advice for aspiring creators outside of... if you have any advice for other aspiring creatives outside of simply reading.
Well, I could give you 500 titles, but I do have a mandatory reading list of 5-6 books. I founded my own film school, the Rogue Film School, which is not a real film school because I do not teach anything. Of course, I sense their problems. They have to speak up, and I tackle the problems and obstacles, and of course I speak about my experiences. The only two things, because I advertised it, the only two things I teach is lock picking with these surgical tools, and secondly, forgery of documents. Because when you make films, you have to develop a certain sense, a certain amount of criminal energy. If you don't have it, you cannot make the films that I do. For example, Fitzcarraldo only was possible with a very elaborately forged shooting permit during the time of a military dictatorship. So, but I would say one book if you're into writing or any creative thing, and I advertise the book all the time. It's a more obscure book by an English writer, I think published at the end of the 60s, called The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. And it's diaries where he describes watching peregrines at a time where there were only a little more than a dozen healthy breeding pairs of peregrines left in the United Kingdom. And we know nothing or hardly anything about J.A. Baker. And he observes a small segment of the real world, but with a passion that is unprecedented. You never see, and I think everybody who writes, everybody who makes films, everybody who paints must look at the world in such a deep awe and with a compassion that has no bounds. And by the way, Baker writes prose of a caliber we have not seen since Joseph Conrad. J.A. Baker, The Peregrine. And it has become a small bestseller by now. And I keep hammering it in. Everyone who is into something creative, it's a must read, The Peregrine. Read it.
Thank you.
Hi, you're obviously a very gifted storyteller. So for you, what are the good elements that make up a good story? Like, what makes a story worth telling?
Well, I can't give you any advice, but as a storyteller, you would know instantly this is big, and you've got to do it. And big stories always come at me with a certain vehemence. It's not that somebody tells me something and I hear some gossip or something like that. It's always an enormous vehemence, and it's so big that I cannot duck down in the trenches anymore. So it's thrown at me and I have to face it. And I have to tackle it, and I have to transform it into a book or into a poem or into a film or whatever. But if you are a storyteller, you have to have it in you. And you have to have it in you to tell me whatever, anything. There's, for example, some of the floor is ripped out. There's a marking in the floor. Tell me the story of this. What happened here? And you have to tell it instantly. Then you are a storyteller. And I have situations like this in a workshop with young filmmakers, and I said, you have to be capable of that. And I was sitting under an archway, and there was a big prominent stone built in it, and I said to the one sitting next, tell me the story of that stone. And the young man sat there and couldn't make up a story, and I said, you tell me the story. And nobody could. So they asked me, what is your story of the stone? And it surprised me that they asked me now, and I said, yeah, well, this stone, it has this cubic form. It was a boy who was harassed in school, and they really pursued him, and then some bullies trampled on him until he became this square form, and it was put in this ark, and he cursed the bullies, and now there were volcanoes. And now they are all inside these volcanoes, and they are spat out as flames every night. That's the story of the stone. You have to be able to tell the story of this chair. There's a wonderful thing in Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander. And I think it's only in the long version, in the 1-hour television version. And he tells the story of a chair to the kids. I mean, it's just really, really good. So you have to go to Marrakesh and listen to the storytellers who tell stories, of course, in Arabic, to an audience that crowds around them. And I saw a storyteller and a boy completely enthralled standing next to him, and he tapped the boy on the head so that he was shaken out of his reverie. He wanted him to be back the boy that he was. So it's so good. You have to learn that.
Hello. This might prove to be a bit of a limited question, but this seemed the appropriate venue to ask it. In his semi-autobiographical novel, Hollywood, the German-born writer Charles Bukowski recounts an amusing interaction with you where he refers to you under the pseudonym of Werner Herzog, or something to that effect. I've long been curious if this interaction did in fact take place, if you had any recollection of it, and just on the subject of Charles Bukowski, though he may not, he may be a bit more contemporary than some of the names spoken here tonight. Have you read any of his poetry or prose? And
a little bit, not a great fan of his.
That was the chance I took at.
He's more known for his lifestyle.
Yes.
A very unusual, rebellious, anarchic life. Yes, I met him through a filmmaker who made a film on a book of Bukowski. Pardon? Yes. And
Nailed it.
Anyway, so now we had some conversations. Not easy to speak to him because from 10 in the morning he was pretty drunk, and it was difficult to have a conversation with him. I did not read what he wrote about me. I never saw it. So, all right.
Would you mind to tell me what he wrote?
No, yeah, it's okay. I don't need to know everything.
I teach poetry here. I love the way that you spoke about Holderlin, and I was curious about other poets that you love as a poet. I mean, Rilke and Celan were the sort of 20th century titans of.
Don't go for the 20th century.
Yeah,
yes,
so can you talk more about the poets that you love that inform your own work?
Yes, there are some wonderful ones in the 20th century as well. But before that, let's say Rimbaud or Chinese, almost everything of the Tang period, 9th, 8th century in China, or the Edda, the poetic Edda, Icelandic poetry 1,000 years back. Some German poets like Johann Christian Günther, Gryphius, I could rattle on names, but they wouldn't really fill with much meaning. But I could give you one in particular, Virgil, Roman antiquity, and I'm not really speaking of the Aeneid. The Aeneid is more programmatic, big discourse, or of course epic poetry about the grandiose beginning of the Roman Empire under Augustus. So there's a programmatic goal in it. All, of course, containing incredibly beautiful poetry. But I'm very, very fond of, deeply, deeply impressed by his Georgics. Virgil grew up as a farm boy in northern Italy near Mantua. And of course, he saw all the country life, and in this arguably the greatest of all poems ever written, the Georgics, and he describes, for example, the miracle and the beauty of the beehive, and he describes the harvest and pruning of apple trees, and he describes also the horrors of the plague invading the stables. There's a part in it, 1 or 2 pages, about describing the death of a horse that has plague that is completely indelibly in my memory. And in a way, it is not descriptive and it has no program. and he knows exactly what he is writing about. And what happened to me is when I was in Antarctica doing a film, you get out of the plane, you land on the Ross ice shelf after 8 hours from New Zealand, and there's glaring sunlight and glaciers around blinding you. And the cinematographer next to me says, Werner, when we stepped out, how can we ever describe this whole continent to the audiences back home? And I said to him, Peter, you know what, to Peter Zeitlinger, you know what, we are doing it exactly like Virgil did it in the Georgics. He does not really describe things and doesn't give instructions about plowing the fields and so. He names the glory of the beehive, and he names the glory of pruning the apple trees, and he names the horror of the dying horse and the dying sheep. So what we are going to do, we just name the glory of the continent, and that was the film. And I owe it to Virgil. So
Yes, that's it. Final parting words.